troubling uptick in anti-Semitic violence here in the U.S. Joining us to talk about it tonight, Fox News contributor Jamu Green, RNC national spokesperson Paris Denard, and KTTH Seattle radio host Jason Rantz. Okay, panel, I want to show a little bit of what we've seen in these recent attacks on Jewish Americans, and we're going to get your reaction on the other side. Jason, I'll start with you. It's incredibly hard for me to look at that, just as with the attacks we've seen on Asian Americans and other hate crimes recently, and think these are the streets of the United States of America, but you have actually experienced this firsthand.
Yeah, last week I was at an anti-Israel rally here in Seattle, and the second I got there, it was very clear what the intent was. There was a Jewish couple that ended up getting assaulted, having their Israeli flag stolen, stomped on, danced on, and then burned. And then when I was there, I was also assaulted as I was filming a portion of the speeches. This has been going on for a while. Obviously, we're seeing now an uptick because of what's going on between Israel and Hamas, a terrorist organization that too many people are rooting for. And the difference is, you mentioned the anti-Asian American hate crimes. Well, a lot of folks on the left were calling that out, and I'm glad that they did. Not a lot of folks calling this out. I'm not seeing the Stop Jewish Hate Crimes Twitter hashtag trend. I'm not seeing a lot of folks in Hollywood and on the left in the Democratic Party speaking out, and in part because a lot of this violence is being driven by the progressive anti-Semitic wing of the Democratic Party. I don't think the Democrats as a whole are anti-Semitic. I think that they are pro-Israel, generally speaking. But the progressive wing has an anti-Semitism problem, and no one on the left wants to call it out.
Jimmy, what about that? How do you answer that?
Well, let me start by saying I think it's horrific what Jason went through and witnessed and should be condemned. I agree with President Biden's statement yesterday as he signed the COVID hate crimes bill that silence is complicity. Here's the issue. Using human rights abuses by the Israeli state against Palestinians as cover for hatred of Jewish people needs to be condemned, no matter what side of the aisle that you're in. We also need to have a lot more education to let people be able to differentiate between the actions of the Israeli state and criticism of governments and expressions of hate against people based on religion. That is how we deal with, I think, not just hate crimes against Jewish people, but as you mentioned, we have seen this in a number of different communities throughout this past year. And there is not a way, I think, to frame this as far as whose pain is worse that is going to be helpful, or even in the partisan frame. I think of the mothers of the two Israeli children who lost their lives in the violence in the last 11 days, in the same way I think of the mothers of the 63 Palestinian children who've lost their lives. We have to find a way of putting humanity first when it comes to being able to differentiate between what the state is doing and just outright hatred of someone because of their religion.
Yeah,
Call out Hamas a terrorist organization.
Let me say this, though. Right, and Paris, to that point, we want to talk about humanity, and I think everybody agrees we don't want to see innocent children and women and people who are not actively participating in attacking to be their lives lost or to be injured. But we have to be making that distinction, as we continue to do, between the Palestinian people and those who are caught up in this situation and Hamas, a recognized terror organization that many Palestinians say that they actually want freedom from them as well, that they are hurting their people. There is an important distinction in all of this.
You're right, there is an important distinction. The distinction is Hamas is a terrorist organization. And when you have Democrat leaders in Congress, Omar and AOC and Rashida Tlaib saying things that are outright anti-Semitic, when you have the United States of America seemingly not having the back of our strongest ally in the Middle East, Israel. It should be clear, it should be unequivocal that the United States of America stands with Israel and denounces the attacks from the terrorist organization Hamas. And we have not seen that leadership coming from Joe Biden and the Democrats. The Democrats are confused. They have mixed messages. The progressive socialist wing of the Democrat Party are having the loudest voice in seemingly supporting Hamas. 2 days ago, the Republican National Committee chairwoman put out a very clear statement on Twitter saying the Republican Party stands with our ally Israel 100%. And when you have doubts in the American people's minds, and when you have doubts in Israel's mind about where the American people stand in terms of the government, Joe Biden, he needs to be clear about this. The Democrats need to be clear about it. And when progressives like AOC and Rashida Tlaib and others seemingly stand with Hamas, it needs to be denounced. Democrats need to denounce it and be very clear about it. But when you don't have that, when you have feckless foreign policy and hashtag quiet diplomacy, there's no wonder you see the anti-Semitism that's increasing in the American people. There's no wonder you see Israel no longer having to rely on America to get ceasefire deals and relying on Egypt. We went from President Trump having Middle East peace with the Abraham Accords to turmoil with Hamas sending rockets over to Israel. Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and the Democrat Party should be ashamed of how they've let Israel down.
I will say today, the president made very clear unequivocally that he said there's been no shift in how he feels about Israel. He's been a longtime supporter, defender of that important ally for us in the region. And as I mentioned last night, Congresswoman Omar did denounce this violence we've been seeing in the streets. But again, there are those who will say rhetoric has to match actions. And there have been confusing or mixed messages at best from many who are on the more progressive leftist end of the party. Thank you guys all for weighing in tonight, and have a great weekend. We'll see you again soon.
Thanks, Shannon.
Thanks, Shannon.